So anyhow, Lars Larson doesn't charge money for his speaking engagements, although he could command thousands and thousands of dollars. He is an institution in this part of the country. You see him on Fox News sometimes. And I don't know how to thank him, but I did find out he was a fan of single malt scotch. So to say thank you, I got him this. Macallan 12-year-old sherry oak cask. I don't know a lot about single malt scotch, but everybody told me this was good stuff. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce my good friend, Lars Larson. Thank you for coming.
Unnecessary, but appreciated at the same time. I'd love to spend the rest of the day with you, but having met Edith this morning, I have to tell you that my granddaughter is visiting, and she celebrates her third birthday on the 1st of April, and so I have those priorities, and I know that you all have those priorities as well. But it is a pleasure to be with you today, because this is important, what you're doing. I dream, like a lot of you dream, that your kids and your grandkids are all going to have the kind of opportunities that we knew, and hopefully better opportunities. And so what you're doing is essential to that. And I thought an awful lot of what I do on the radio every day, and Richard thought I need another half an hour today in addition to the 30 hours I do on the air every week. Yeah, another half an hour of me. That's what America needs. Okay, I'll take the invitation. I'll take it. And since Richard mentioned movies, I thought I'd mention a movie that's it's not maybe the top of my list, but it's very near to the top. And it's only a couple of years old. Some of you may have seen it, some of you may not, but I have interesting history with it just in terms of loving this story. And it does connect to what you're doing here today, so bear with me. There's a guy by the name of Andy Weir, and he's a scientist and a technical guy. And a number of years ago, I read this book that he had written, and it was this obscure little downloadable ebook on Amazon. And it's also an example of what you can do when you don't have all the tools. You say, well, I could do a lot if I just had a giant organization and a lot of money and all kinds of people. Andy Weir decided to tell a story, just because he thought it'd be interesting to tell a story. And he thought, I'm going to put a person in a very, very difficult situation. That doesn't even describe it, because he said, I'm going to put a person in a position where he's going to die if he doesn't solve the problems around him. And he's on his own, and it became called The Martian, the movie that Damon was in. I don't like Damon's politics, but I like some of the movies he's in. And here's what happens. He puts him on Mars with a bunch of other people, and they're scientists, and then there's a big storm, dust storm, and they all leave thinking he's dead, and he's stuck on this planet by himself. Now, the story he wrote, he began crafting this story that he would send out to an email list of his friends, and they would pick it to pieces and say, this is wrong and that's wrong, and he wrote it to be technically accurate. To, like a lot of stories that we like in movies, he keeps putting the hero into an impossible situation, which the hero figures out how to solve, at least for the moment, and then throws another wrinkle at him in the next chapter, and another one, and another one. And he wrote this book, and finally, he got so many requests for copies of it from people saying, my friend wants to read this thing you're writing. And he wasn't intending it to be a novel or a movie or anything else. And he contacted Amazon and said, what's the cheapest price I can put on a book and have it available on Amazon as an ebook? And they said 99 cents. Imagine this. This is a guy who's now made a considerable amount of money, but he just wanted his friends who wanted their friends to read it, which is a lot of what you do in your political activity. And so they put it up at 99 cents, and it started selling like crazy. So a publisher contacted him and said, we want to make a book out of it. And then movie producers contacted, said, we want to make a movie out of it. We want to put Matt Damon, one of Hollywood's bigger stars, despite his weird politics. Again, I can forget about the politics. That's what we go to the movies for anyway. And they made a movie out of it. And the reason I find it, and the reason I want to bring you a sense of optimism today, is I could stand here like I do in front of a microphone the rest of the week and tell you all the things that are wrong. But one of the rules I've tried to abide by for at least the last 20 years is if you're going to tell people what's wrong, tell them how to fix it. Otherwise, you're going to, first of all, you won't get invited back for a lot of conversations. They'll say, oh yeah, invite Lars over. He'll bring the whole party to an end very quickly. He'll tell you all the things that are wrong. I am an optimist at heart. I try to pattern myself after the happy warriors out there, and they're a number of them, they all have their flaws. Newt Gingrich is a happy warrior. I don't agree with everything Speaker Gingrich does either, but I look at what he does and I say, he's working the problem. And I'm not ruining the movie to tell you that The Martian does end well. And it ends with Damon standing in front of a class of young astronauts. And it almost brings tears to your eyes when he stands there and he says, you're going to do this thing, and someday you're going to find yourself in a situation where if you don't work the problem, you're going to die. And he said, yes, I did find myself in that situation more than once where I had to work the problem or I was going to die. And yes, I did grow my own food out of my own waste. And yes, I worked the problem. But he says you have to work the problem. Even when everything is stacked up against you, and you know to a fair certainty as a scientist, you know this situation is likely to kill me. And maybe sooner rather than later. But I'm going to work the problem anyway. And that's what's required of us, is to continue to work the problem. I mean, we can talk about our national debt, we can talk about national security, we can talk about the great threat that is posed by uncontrolled immigration and the political effects that it has, and the economic effects and the social effects, and those are all the bad news. The good news is we can work the problem. And I want to encourage you to work the problem. Because you can say, well, I'm one person, or I'm one person with a small organization, or I have a website, or I have a Twitter account, or an Instagram account, or a Facebook page. How much can I get done? Well, if Andy Weir had done that early on, I never would have read a great book, and they never would have made a great movie, and he never would have had the phenomenal success. He is now no longer working as a technology guy. He's now writing books for a living, and they're making movies out of them. And we've had an interesting couple of months, and I want to bring a couple of recollections of that to you and suggest that they actually suggest the solution. Sometimes the problem suggests the solution. For example, we've just gone through a massive government shutdown. One whole quarter of a massive government shuts down, and to watch the nightly news from the mainstream media, you would believe that Western civilization was about to come to an end, that 165 million of us still go to work every day, but if those 800,000 people are not on the job, well, it's all coming to an end. Well, it isn't coming to an end, but it does suggest part of the solution. I would like a smaller government. I would like less regulation. There's an old politician from Portland named Frank Ivancy, who was mayor of Portland back in the day. And he had all kinds of interesting quirks to him. One was that he liked words. And one of the words he liked best was Fingerspitzengefühl. And I've actually tested this on some friends of mine who know German. I don't know German. But what he said it was lightness of touch. Right? And it meant that if you ride a horse, and I've ridden horses, I'm not the best, but I can ride horses. You've learned very quickly that the way to ride a horse is not to grab the reins and just start yanking them as hard as you can. The way to ride a horse is to have just enough control that the horse knows who's in charge, in the case of riding a horse, and not so much that you're just pulling that bit into the horse's mouth every 2 seconds, because he's bigger than you are, and he will get even if you do that. I wish that while government is not our master, government is supposed to be our servant, that the government took the same approach. What is the lightest touch we could have on the citizens of this country and still protect lives, protect national security and the like? And one of the ways to do that would be if we had government agencies that actually took that approach. A friend of mine likes to say that ducks quack and dogs bark and regulators regulate. And one of the dangers of government is that when you set someone up to regulate, they don't say, well, we have enough regulation on here. We have that lightness of touch that a good sports car, a good race car driver has, that a good horseman has. We're going to regulate. And every day we're going to come to work, and when we think we've written enough regulations, well, there's tomorrow or Monday, and we're going to go in and regulate some more. They do not follow that idea that it would be better if you said, we've regulated this industry enough. In fact, maybe we could take some of the things that this agency does and regulates, and if we could go to the industry itself, or some of the groups that represent the industry, and say to the meatpacking industry, I tell you what, instead of having all these government regulators in there who are civil servants who effectively can't be fired, which means when they screw up, people may get sick, people may die, but they will never lose their jobs. In fact, we're so generous as civil servants that even when they're off work for a month, we give them a paycheck. And they're literally debating right now, after this big government shutdown, the idea of saying, and there are a bunch of private contractors who work for us too, and they didn't do any work for us in the last month, but why don't we pay them a paycheck too? I'm not kidding. The Congress is debating whether we should send paychecks to private sector organizations that are contractors to the government, janitors, computer coders, whatever, and say, even though you didn't do any work, we have this big, well, we don't have a big treasury. We have a treasury that's actually running a $900 billion deficit this year, but we're going to send you a check anyway, even though you didn't actually do any work. Now, I've never worked for a private sector employer that does that. I don't know of any of you. There might be a few out there who say, plant has to be shut down, but I'm going to keep the paychecks going because he or she understands it's good for business. You got to hang on to your valuable people, and they're going to leave if you don't pay them. But that's a business decision. I don't think anybody who works for the federal government is going to say, well, gosh, I got shorted a couple of weeks of pay, so I'm going to leave this great job that pays better than the people we serve, has a better pension, better medical care. I'm going to leave this and go out into the wide world of the private sector where you are paid based on the results you produce, and when you screw up, you get fired. Believe me, I've seen too many people fired because they screw up. So I'm going to suggest that one of the solutions we can look at is to have the government downsized both by the deregulation that is going on now under President Trump, and he's produced literally billions of dollars in savings that translates into paychecks for you, and if not for you, for your sons and daughters and grandsons and granddaughters who work for private sector companies. When you don't hit them with unnecessary regulations, they have more money to expand, to pay their people, to do research and development, and that's something the government doesn't do very well. So for lovers of small government, and I'm one, and I suspect that because you're here at WLN, that you love small government too, and light regulation, that's a solution that's suggested. Now, how do you work on this? Taking the offense is the best way to do it, and I'm now thinking of it in terms of the Martian. Work the problem, whatever the problem is. Now, you can self-defeat and say this is a problem that is insoluble. That's self-defeating. It will get you nowhere. It would have got Matt Damon dead on Mars, and that would have been the end of the movie very quickly if he had taken that approach. I'm in an impossible situation. I can't possibly save my life. Every bit of my brain that's scientific says this is going to kill me. Why don't I just sit here and wait for the end to come? And in an environment like Oregon and Washington, I can see where some people have taken that approach. They are conservatives and they say everything around me is not. But Richard is right, and Mike Neerman is right to say there is an untapped reservoir of people out there who no longer identify with the Republican Party, and I find myself identifying with the GOP Party more and more. I'm still registered as a member of the Republican Party because I like to vote in the primary. But I'm first a conservative, and a fair amount of libertarian in me that says, leave me alone as much as you possibly can, and things will be better. So I want you to take the offense and work the problem. And it drives me nuts when people talk in these lofty ideals, and just go out and work the problem. How about some practical suggestions? I get a chance to get 30 hours of airtime every week, 15 of it in the Northwest, 15 of it nationally. You say, well, you have a great opportunity. Well, I do, but all I'm doing is talking and throwing out ideas and making suggestions. And Mike was nice enough to say to me that some of them actually get to the legislature and will get good conservatives kicked off of important committees because the legislature right now run by Democrats doesn't like conservative ideas. But one of the things I'd like to suggest you do, and it seems kind of obvious, is to run for office. Now, the office, is everybody who calls me and emails me seems to be interested in, is Congress or the legislature. But I'm going to suggest you start smaller, not just because starting smaller is probably a better way to grow into that position if that's where you should end up. But it's because of the way I started. I started working at 15 years of age in a radio station in Tillamook, Oregon, that was kind of a funny place to work because it was on the edge of a cow pasture, and it had very primitive equipment, and I got paid the federal minimum wage of $1.85 an hour, which was at least a move up from my job at the furniture store when I was 14, working for $1.15 an hour, but it was a start. And I aspired to go up, but I thought, let's work this job while I can and get good at it and then move up. I would like to suggest that you run for the local offices, and the one I think that probably is the most accessible to all of you, and the one where you can arguably make the biggest difference, is the school board.
Oh, yeah.
And for a whole bunch of reasons that I'm sure you already know about, but when you run for the school board, it's a tough haul, because the teachers' unions do not want that school board to do anything but get out a big rubber stamp and say yes to whatever it is the unions want, who represent most of the teachers in most of the places. In fact, I'm a big believer in charter schools. So you'd say, well, Lars, why are you suggesting that I run for the school board for the government, the traditional government schools, when you believe in charter schools? We may get to all charter schools someday, and I think it would be a good thing if we did. For those of you not familiar with charter schools, the one key aspect I see to them, when a charter school fails, it goes away. When a government school fails, it goes back and says, we're failing, but we'd fail so much better if you give us a lot more money. And then when you give them the money, as the legislatures of both Oregon and Washington have done over the last few years, billions and billions of dollars that they've fed into these failing institutions in the hopes that if you give another billion to a failed institution, it will fail less or succeed more. That has generally not been the case. Charter schools who fail their charter go away. And in fact, one of the answers I want to provide for you when you say to people, we should have all charter schools, all of them. Every single school should be a charter school. And when it fails, it should go away. They say, the charter school failure rate is really high. I say, that's good. Tell them the answer they don't expect, but tell them for a reason. If you start a small business, if 10 of you in this room each start one small business, 9 of you are going to fail. Those are the statistics in America today. And America is the best place to start a business anywhere in the world because of our liberties, because of our courts, because of a lot of reasons. But 9 out of 10 of you will fail. But that's good, because the one that succeeds is the one that's found the right product or right service in the right way, offered in the right way to be successful. If 10 out of 10 succeeded, I can guarantee you that in socialist countries, when the government starts an enterprise, in say Venezuela, where the inflation rate is 1,000,000% per year, no joke, 10 out of 10 government enterprises do not fail. Now that doesn't mean they succeed. They just don't fail because they're the government's enterprises. So after all, no government agency ever goes away. So while Venezuela is failing its people miserably, its government enterprises will never go out of business until the Venezuelan people finally correct things and change government, which it appears they've tried to do. So run for office, run for the school board, and do 2 things. Become a financial watchdog, because our schools are run imperfectly because they're funded very generously. And I would suggest that when your friends start saying, we have to put more money into education, tell them no. And then when they say, hold on a second, are you saying education isn't important? You say, yes, it is important. Right now, in Oregon and Washington, the average funding per student per year is between $14,000 and $15,000 per student per year. Now, what does it cost to go to the University of Oregon for 1 year as an in-state student? About 2/3 of that amount. How about UW? 2/3 of that amount. OSU, $10,000 will get you a year at OSU. $15,000, close to, is what will get you 1 year in a public school that has a dropout rate that they managed to manipulate the numbers to the point where only 1/4 of the students drop out. that 72% don't. And I can tell you how they manipulate the numbers, but they've managed to manipulate the numbers. Part of it is you don't have to pass an exam to graduate from high school. You pass individual tests, but there are some states that make you pass an exam at the end to show, have you actually absorbed something in 12 years? So you have an institution that gets almost, let's say it's the lower number, 14,000. That means in a classroom of 20, which we're told doesn't exist, because they're going to tell you they're all 50 kids to a classroom, which is a constructive lie, but it's a subject for another day. So you put $14,000 per student per year into a classroom. And here's the easy math. If there are 20 kids in that classroom, that's $280,000 going into that classroom. What's the teacher get? Salary and benefits, 100 grand. Where's the other 180 going?
Yeah.
They really can't tell you. Now, do you know the ugly truth? They're going to try an argument on you, and you should know the numbers to push it back. Part of this is knowing the subject matter and having intelligent answers, so when you spread the word to your friends, which is the old-fashioned, old school method of social media, talk to your friends, tell them, they'll say, well, it's the disabled kids. They want to blame it on the mentally and physically disabled kids. That's also a lie. I've asked school administrators, what percentage of your kids are mentally or physically disabled? They say 15, maybe generously 20%. And how much extra do you have to spend on them? The average is another 30%. If you work those numbers, it still doesn't explain where the other 180 goes. Now, how can you have an enterprise where 2/3 of the money allocated to a task doesn't get to the task? 180 goes somewhere, 100 goes to the teacher. The schools, for the most part, are already paid for. This is why being on the school board and a run is so very important, because you can be a financial watchdog. And the second thing you can do is you can watch for a lot of the political garbage that is shoved on kids. God bless teachers, some of my best friends. My mom died almost 50 years ago, so I was about 10. She died, 50 years will be the end, December of this year. Some of my best friends were teachers. And God bless the teachers, but back in the day when we were all in school, they weren't pushing politics on it. And for all the schools that will tell you that they're so busy making sure that kids are taught the things they need to learn, and that they're so overloaded, then how do you have time to push, I hate Donald Trump, or the wall is a racist and immoral idea? How do you have time for that? When you're telling me you don't have enough time to teach them math and science and reading and history and a bit about the Constitution and that. If you have time to talk about your political views, you are wasting time that you should be using on kids. The second thing is that you can watch for those things, and when they come before the school board, you can be the lone dissenter. Now, it may be, optimistically, I'd love to see every one of you on a school board where there are 4 conservatives and 3 liberals, or 5 conservatives and 4 liberals, and I'd love to have that kind of split. It's not likely, but at least you can bring it to public attention, and you can be, the Greek word is ombudsman. It means to speak out, and they use that for various fairly good programs out there, but you can be the ombudsman. They can say, boy, if we vote on this, Larson is going to vote the other direction, or Burke is going to vote the other direction, but he's only one vote. Yes, but he can make friends in the press corps. He can make friends with talk radio. He can make friends with reporters. And if you're the lone dissenting voice, nothing reporters like better than having the lone dissenter who's vocal about why he or she dissented on that vote, and so said, no, we are not going to do this. And if you don't believe that the schools are actively being used, not just by individual teachers, but by the administration for these kinds of purposes, let me tell you what was pried loose from the Portland public schools as an example. When you saw all those protests last year on guns, on Trump, and everything else, you thought, oh, a bunch of kids just got together and spontaneously said, let's have a march and walk out of class. And that was the story that you got from the school administration. We had nothing to do with this. It was a grassroots movement of these children. And then the documents were pried loose, the emails, in which the administration said, we are going to do this. So adult people paid 6-figure salaries as principals and administrators and superintendents in the schools decided to take your children or grandchildren and your money, because the time they wasted was your resource that you bought for the education of kids and use those kids as political props because they know that to people in my business, a child with a sign is very sympathetic. Well, I'll tell you something. I will guarantee you that I've never in my career as a talk show host, and as a reporter, I just report on what I saw and what I heard, but I put my own opinion into it now. If they went out and staged a protest in favor of the right to life using your children, I would oppose it. It is wrong to use children for that purpose. If they staged a protest in favor of the wall using your children and grandchildren, I would oppose it. Being in that position to be the lone dissenter to say, I don't want the schools to do this, and if we catch teachers who are proselytizing on whatever subject, whether it's gay rights, the right, so-called right to abortion, on the wall, or Donald Trump, or anything else, if you catch a teacher doing that, you straighten them out, you tell their boss to straighten them out, who these days probably doesn't want to straighten them out, and you tell them to fly right, or they're going to be looking for another job, period. So I'd encourage you to run for those jobs that are viewed sort of as lesser jobs, and to a large extent they are. They're thankless, they usually don't have a paycheck, they usually require lots of hours of reading and attending meetings and listening to the teachers' union scream at you and having to take the unpopular view that no, kids should not be running the schools. It's fine to listen to them, but right now the Portland Public Schools are listening to the kids on the subject of school security. They actually voted to put off expanding their school resource officers to have cops in schools a year after the shooting at Parkland, Florida, where 17 people died, because we're listening to the kids and they say they don't want officers there who might charge a kid with committing a crime. Parkland, you wouldn't even know the name of Parkland, Florida today if school administrators had said, Nick Cruz has committed crimes in this school. He's threatened kids, which is a crime. He's brought weapons to school, which is a crime. And if they had brought the cops in on that and sent him over to the justice system, he'd had to stand in front of a judge at 15 and maybe be put on probation. I'm not talking about throwing kids in jail, but I'm talking about having somebody course correct this kid. He might never have walked into that school and murdered 17 people. He did because school administrators said, we don't want to give a kid a criminal record. Well, he's going to have a criminal record now, but 17 people had to die to make it happen. And if they'd given him a criminal record and a little taste of a ride in a police car and standing in front of a judge and some of those things would have been better. School boards can make a difference there. You can do that. I want you to get on social media. Some of you probably already are. I'm on it, and I realize all of the deficits of social media. It has lots of them. It also has some people, the same government that runs Amtrak, the post office, and the DMV running your medical care is a sensible idea. You can get on and politely but directly and maybe pointedly say, this is why that's ridiculous. And if you get really good at it to where you can pierce their little balloon of Medicare for all and do it in such a way that nobody can fault the way you said. Because we all realize, as much as political correctness has gone too far, that when we do these things and we use some kind of word, the focus becomes the word instead of this. In fact, last night I was talking about one poor guy who's become very popular on YouTube. I'd never even heard his name before. But he got thrown off YouTube because his last name is Dyke. And they said that's a slur against gay women. And he said, it's my name. My father-in-law's name is Van Dyne, so this guy's probably another Dutch boy. But they threw him off YouTube because of his name. Not because of what he was doing on YouTube, but because someone in the hierarchy of YouTube said, your name is a dirty slur. And I know, and we were having fun with it, because I said, the name Larson, and Larson technically means Lars, son of Lars. Well, obviously that is playing up to the vast male patriarchy that has done so much damage. And since it's a white male, well, because as a Swede, I didn't get the blonde hair and the blue eyes, but obviously it's the white male patriarchy, and your name is, and then I caught a call from I talked to Christian Toto, who's our movie guy. He writes some really great conservative movie reviews, and I said, Christian, you're in trouble. because clearly your first name is a reference to that evil religion tied in with white men who want to run the world. So there's a lot of political correctness out there, but if I could make those suggestions to you, that you run for those offices, that you support the people who are going to do it, that you get out on social media, that you spread the word, and that you push back. Taking the offense is pushing back, and it's working the problem, and do it sensibly and do it politely in a way that no one can fault the way you did it. Then all they can try to take issue with is the message that you're sending. And if the message is sent in a way that says, I'm taking issue with your ideas, not with your color, not with your gender, not with your sexual preference, not with anything like that, I'm just taking issue with your ideas, we will be able to push back against that. Richard's going to get the hook, or I'm going to get the hook. Richard?
No.
Thank you very much.
It's always great to have Lars here. This is the second time he's